So, hello from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. It's great to be here. I met Jose, Bala, and other people behind the lovely Backend initiative a couple of weeks ago, and it's great to see so many energy around this topic. I'm going to talk about the cooperative gig economy. I work at a foundation in Amsterdam where we actively try to engage citizens and build on a rich history of a European cooperative movement. So if we think about a gig economy and how to govern it, I think it's interesting to see that you can govern it in different ways. You can govern it in a cooperative civil way. You can govern it in a private commercial way and in a more state-oriented way. So the shared resources that are out there, which used to be land, water, and in today's world, these shared resources are very much the open internet protocols, the digital infrastructures. And I think it is interesting to see how these three ways of governing the public space can be balanced out together. In Europe, we see there's a rich history in a more civil commons cooperative movement. From 1,000 years after Christ, we see that there were different commons, which were small groups that together governed knowledge, but also public shared resources. The advantage was that they were rather small, from a couple of hundred people to max 1,000, so they could stay very close to the needs of the people, of the members involved. The disadvantage was if you had governmental interference, you had kings that wanted different things, these small groups were quite vulnerable. We see a second wave where the different cooperatives, such as producer cooperatives that produce dairy products, that started with 7 farms and now are a cooperative of 17,000 farms in the Netherlands alone, that they managed to create a lot of critical mass. This was in a time when governments became stronger, and hence also these cooperatives grew to be able to balance out the state, the private, and the civil ways of governing public spheres. The disadvantage, however, was that it was difficult to involve the different members because they grew so large. Waag, the NGO that I work for, we were founded in 1996, and this was actually at the beginning of the third cooperative wave, a wave that started with energy cooperatives, but has social cooperatives, different housing cooperatives, and we see that they very much use the digital infrastructures. And I think Backend is an extremely interesting example of what happens to the shared resources in opening them up and allowing these different cooperatives to use them. So you've probably all heard this. These are pictures from Backend. The ecosystem, the yellow part, is basically, in my opinion, the digital shared resource. So assuming that we all know what the protocol does, opening up the infrastructure so that multiple consumer and provider platforms can find each other. What we think is extremely important is to make sure that on these consumer and provider platforms, you will have cooperative, state and private platform initiatives present. However, in the Netherlands, and maybe that's the same in India, we see that over the last decades, mostly public-private partnerships have been made, and most of the internet is dominated by very much private commercial companies. So to change this, we started a platform called Incubator in the municipality of Amsterdam, where we try to change the balance from these platform monopolies to more cooperative platforms. So we see that there are several interesting examples worldwide where there's actually already alternatives to large platforms like Airbnb, Uber, and Deliveroo in a more cooperative sphere. We see that there's interesting examples in bike delivery platforms where you have an example of CoopCycle in France, which is a cooperative that has developed a software platform that is now used by over 60 delivery co-ops all spread out in Europe. The cyclists, the delivery cyclists, are the co-op members, and hence they are in direct control to co-owning the software that they use in order to provide their service. We also see it in the car sharing economy, where in a similar model, a cooperative company develops a software and distributes that amongst several cooperative initiatives in the European Union. The interesting thing is that they can learn a lot from each other. They can exchange knowledge on legal advice, how to deal with licenses, how to deal with software development, how to build this cooperative structure on a large scale, and staying close to the needs of small neighborhoods, but also the needs of the drivers that are jointly owning these cooperative initiatives. In the energy world, we see in the Netherlands a huge increase in energy cooperatives from 2012, mostly because there's much more wind energy and solar energy, and citizen communities realize, hey, we can cooperatively bring our energy together. This led to a European-wide distribution of open source energy management software development, but also a lot of cooperative structures throughout Europe that together develop the tools needed for a decentralized green energy future. So what we at Waag try to do is try to engage civil society. We do that by developing open source air meters in Hollandse luchten, which means Dutch airs, where we measure the air quality together with citizens. We do it together in public spaces, which is a coalition that helps the cultural sector build upon an open infrastructure so that they are less dependent on large American monopolies. And we do it a lot by engaging with policymakers and trying to together have them realize the potential of technology. However, most of this technology is like an iceberg underwater that is invisible. We see that technology in certain countries is very much state governed, where the design process and state values are prevalent, and where citizens are more used as or seen as subjects. We see in the private domain that citizens are seen as consumers. They are treated as consumers, and they're not really engaged as citizens in the technology that we can use to shape the world around us. So we try to push forward, what we try to get the energy together with here in Amsterdam, in Netherlands, but also in Europe and in the wider world, is to really get citizens engaged. And I'm very happy that initiatives like Beacon came up, from which we can learn a lot, and which we are at the moment trying to implement in delivery cooperatives in Europe. So these different layers, won't go into it in much detail, but I think what is good to always realize is from what starting point, from what foundation do you start developing technology? What's the social-economical considerations? How do you want to govern your gig economy? To express this and to basically have this political idea on how you want to use technology is, in our opinion, very important. From there, you can actually have a design process which is transparent, because you know from what starting points you are actually moving from. This leads to a tech stack which we all know, or at least which I think has been presented often. There's an infrastructure, there's protocols on top of which all different interesting tools can be built. So with that, we work on all these different domains, and I think it's super interesting to see how we can work on this third cooperative wave, which can use and benefit from this worldwide efforts on this open digital space, and yet stay very close to the common values and the common needs of individual communities and cities worldwide, and actually address them in a proper way. Thank you, and I look forward to hear more about the different initiatives on this interesting conference. Thanks.
Thomas, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thomas, have you been to India?
Yes, I have actually.
Okay, so I can tell you that a lot of things what you're talking about is so relevant and so applicable pretty much everywhere in the world. So, and the kind of volume and what we're talking about in India when it comes to gig economy is in staggering numbers, right? So, your views on India and gig economy?
My views on India and gig economy, I think the scale and the bold effort of creating these initiatives like ONDC and Beacon, I think we can learn a lot from it. I think on sort of an institutional level, the Netherlands and Europe might be differently organized because we're sort of smaller communities, but therefore also we're struggling with really standardizing and having such a broad digital open effort as a European Union. So it's very inspiring to see what you do there and to implement that in these cooperative institutions and structures that are in place already in the European Union.
Thank you, Thomas. So we will let you log off. You don't need to stay through the time. So thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us remotely.
Thanks. Have a good day.
You have a question? Sorry, Thomas. There is one question, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Manohar.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I just wanted to bring, from your perspective, the distinction between the gig workforce as well as the moonlighting, that what we have here. And there are for and against views about moonlighting, and many times it's linked to gig in whatever the context. What is your take on this, and what's happening in Europe? Is it something distinct and different?
So what is happening in Europe in terms of the gig economy and how I see the gig economy, or how I define the gig economy?
And versus moonlighting.
Yeah, so here in the Netherlands, we see that there is many different American platforms that were welcomed a decade ago in Amsterdam, because there's a very high percentage of people that are digitally savvy. There's many expats here, so I think in a way this gig economy was very much welcomed, also by these people and by politicians who had a more worldly presence. However, in the last couple of years, we currently call them dark stores, for example, in terms of the delivery platforms, where we see that neighborhoods start to resist the gig economy, because they see that these initiatives, often American initiatives, have their distribution centra very locally in the city, and people start to slowly resist towards them. So I think the enthusiasm of the early days of, hey, this is an amazing new way of organizing an economy and having flexible workers. I think this is slowly changing to a more critical assessment, where also the needs of the riders are much more critically addressed. So we see that some cooperative movements emerge that work on an hourly remuneration basis, and They start to organize themselves differently, and I think if they get the right digital tools, that they can definitely be a very interesting alternative to a more private platform economy.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much. Once again, appreciate you joining us remotely. We'll let you go and log off. Please, a round of applause for Thomas, please.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.